Lawyers have read it. At what point, when working for a defendant, did you realize my client is a monster? Story 1. My friend was roughed up by campus security and detained illegally by them. He didn't just sue the campus, but also a personal suit against the guard and threatened to make it as messy and public as possible. Scared, the campus offered to fire the guard if he dropped the suit. He proceeded to push his lawyer to take the longest, most painfully drawn-out proceedings he could to have the 55-year-old guard fired and lose his pension or have the university get dragged through the mud by every civil liberties group in the country. The university blinked at this and let the guard take all the mess. As an added bonus, he made sure the guard got full notice of all of this on the 19th of December. Story 2. I had a client who was accused of domestic violence. Essentially, he threw his girlfriend out of a second-story window. Now, he has a terrible history, but so does a lot of my clients, and his attitude is a little entitled, just typical. But he also knows the deal and wants a plea deal. So I'm not really prepared when he absolutely refuses the no jail offer from the state. Keep in mind there were like 5 witnesses. Why? Because they wanted him to pay for her medical bills. Okay, an asshole, but whatever, not the worst. What did it was his counter offer. I ain't paying that witch's bills. Tell them I'll pay for the window. The prosecutor was not happy. Story 3. I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I can name a few instances where I was just absolutely disgusted with my client. Caveat, these are mostly years ago when I was taking just any old case. I mostly practice white-collar and federal now. So I won a DUI case because the government messed up on something right before the trial was to begin. My client gives me a hug and completely reeks of alcohol. He had driven to court. I took his keys and called his mother. Another one was a client was accused of molesting a 12-year-old. He was in his mid-40s at the time, and I had to shut him down real quick when he tried to tell me how the 12-year-old was coming on to him. I represented a woman once for a grand theft charge. I left her in my office to get some things copied before she left. After she left, I realized my sunglasses and car keys were stolen. I tracked her down in the lobby and told her I was not going to represent her anymore and I would call the police if she didn't empty her pockets in front of me and give me my things. I also had a client who was released after 25 years in prison for murder, and then the same day he beat up his prospective new landlord. He ended up getting another 10 years. He was unrepentant and laughed about how he hit the guy. I thought, man, this guy deserves to be in prison. I took the case to trial anyway and, shocker, lost, and he got 10, the max. And a client pretended to be a doctor so he could sell steroids. According to the Gov, he had numerous clients who were made to believe that his steroids would cure their cancer. They paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars and some of them died. I just thought that was pure evil. Story 4. I've done a lot of prison legal aid and I could tell stories about child molesters that would turn you green. But instead I'll turn you green in a different way. I had a kid, 17, who was mildly cognitively disabled due to brain trauma he sustained at the hands of his birth parents, who ended up with a really wonderful foster care family and thrived. He was a popular kid in school, a good athlete, got a girlfriend, and invited her to meet up and be teenagers one night in a corn silo, which I guess is a thing that country kids do. I don't know. This all comes from the pre-sentence investigation report I read before taking his case, but this girl met him at the silo and they were hanging out inside. By his account, they were having a nice time and he was really enjoying himself. Then, for no particular reason, he picked up a 2x4 and bashed her skull in. He then used a combination of very crude farm implements, shovels and hoes, to bury it in the corn, and he went home like nothing had happened. Hey, you asked. Story 5. I'm a retired correction officer from NYC's Rikers Island. One day, an inmate asked me to review his case. I was once able to get a 100% innocent man out of jail when I was a new correction officer and was considered one of the smarter ones. The inmate in question had shot another man during an attempted robbery at an ATM in Midtown Manhattan. The entire incident was captured on videotape. The FBI had enhanced one frame from the video in which the suspect's head was in full profile and his right ear had a distinctive characteristic with a square top instead of being rounded. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, the inmate had the audacity to argue that he had the right to shoot the victim because he was a professional robber. According to him, he felt justified in using violence against anyone who resisted. His behavior, including smiling while discussing his crimes, left me stunned. I couldn't believe the level of depravity this individual had sunk to. To help me better understand my new line of work, I decided to read a book called Inside the Criminal Mind, which answered some of my questions. I've since retired from the field and I am thrilled to have put all of those negative and traumatic experiences behind me. Story 6. So, we had a client try to enforce a post employment restraint against a 19-year-old receptionist after she quit and started working for a competitor. The reason? He wanted to make her life hell because she wouldn't sleep with him, a creepy 57-year-old man. His trying to sleep with her was the reason she quit. And unsurprisingly, he didn't take our advice to discontinue his claim, and so we ended up sending him elsewhere. Story 7. My wife used to work for a company that recruited nurses. The non-compete agreement they provided was terribly written and restricted individuals from working in the field for 5 years and within a 500-mile radius, which was too restrictive. Additionally, she discovered that her employer would forge signatures by cutting and pasting in Adobe. Eventually, my wife decided to quit and work at a similar job. She had never signed the non-compete, and we were aware of this fact. However, we received a letter from her attorney with a signed non-compete agreement. I contacted the attorney and explained that we were willing to go to trial, but we wanted the original PDF file of the document and the quote-unquote wet ink original available for inspection at his office to attempt to resolve the issue outside of court. We never heard back from him, but my wife's current employer did. They threatened to sue her if they didn't fire her. My wife had to explain the situation to her new boss and their attorneys. The old and new companies had a mutual client, and the new boss felt obligated to inform the client of the fraud allegations. He just wanted to poach the jobs and advised them to conduct a full audit of the original records. They did, and they ended up terminating their contract with my wife's old company. We received another letter from a new attorney threatening to sue us and claiming millions in damages for divulging trade secrets. So I called this new attorney and explained that the trade secrets were fraudulent and were revealed during the pending litigation brought by his client. I never heard back from them after that. Story 8. I'm a former juvenile court attorney and was listening to this case. I was not involved, so there was no issue. 2 minors, both male, had decided to rob a pizza delivery guy, so they called for a pizza delivery to an empty apartment building. The delivery guy arrived and was subsequently robbed of something like a large pie, his phone, and a 2-liter bottle of Coke or something. The minors then decide they want to take the delivery guy's car, so they take his keys. While one is trying to start the car, the other decides to assault the delivery guy. It turns out the delivery guy's car was a manual or stick shift, and the minors have no idea how to drive it. So instead of ending their crime spree, they kidnap the driver and force him to drive them to their other friend's house across town. Once there, the same minor from earlier assaulted the pizza delivery driver again, then beat up the delivery driver and ran off. The driver makes it into a local shop down the road where he calls the police. Adult offenders don't really bother me, but minors' brains are not fully developed enough to understand the weight of their actions. Kids can be monsters. Story 9. Even though I made a throwaway, I'm going to be a bit vague because I still take my ethical duties to former clients seriously and cannot breach privilege or the NDA I signed. This is a story from a long time ago during the summer after my first year of law school when I was briefly working at a well-known criminal defense firm. The client whose case I was working on was one of several defendants charged with conspiracy to commit murder. 3 individuals had committed the murders and several others had either helped plan it, abducted the victims, came along to watch, or filmed it. In order to see whether our client was one of the individuals present at the scene, I had to watch multiple videos of the murders. I watched multiple people brutally killed in about the worst possible way you can imagine. It wasn't some grainy security footage either. It was an HD video taken by bystanders just a few feet away. I also had to listen to the audio to see if our client's voice could be heard. The screams, were bad. The laughter was worse. It has stuck with me for years and years, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. Thankfully, my internship at that firm ended a few weeks later at the end of the summer. I never looked up the sentence from the case and have no desire to. In our case, there was no presumption of innocence. The individuals involved had all taken pleas in the hope that the prosecutors wouldn't seek the death penalty. The only thing that would change was whether our client would get the death penalty if he was present and filming, or life in prison if we showed that he played a more minimal role. Working in criminal defense meant setting my judgment for people aside so that they could be afforded the rights guaranteed to them by the Constitution. I still did my job to the best of my ability, but I found myself lying awake at night for several weeks in a row, praying to every god that I knew that each of those freaks involved would fry in the electric chair, and that someone would laugh at their screams too. After that internship, I never returned to criminal law. I now practice civil law where I help people recover for wrongs done to them. Story 10. I had a divorce client, a husband and father who disowned his autistic son, tried to argue that he should get all of his wife's retirement having not worked for 12 years, contacted me during the height of Hurricane Sandy. He was in the Bronx and I was in Manhattan, saying he wanted to hold his wife in contempt for not paying him that day while the storm slammed NYC. Told me I was making a big mistake getting married. My wedding date was November 3rd, 4 days after Sandy, saying that I was going to be miserable and regret it, and I could go on and on. But the worst was when several months later, since his divorce was taking a long time, he sent death threats letters to myself and my wife, saying that he had hired an executor to kill two of us if his divorce wasn't finalized in 60 days. I called the police and they said he had left his premises one day earlier. I heard nothing from him until February 2014 when he emailed me, saying he needed a winter coat from his wife and that I could help get it for him. Ironically, the divorce didn't have to be completed because he killed himself before the judge signed the divorce judgment. Story 11. I'm a lawyer for people on death row. Although some of my clients have been convicted of horrible, sometimes nightmare-inducing crimes, I honestly have never had the thought, oh, this person is a monster. What I am far more likely to think is, 1, how do I convince my child to never try meth because meth psychosis is real and horrifying? 2, I am so lucky to have been born into a family where my parents weren't violent, drug addicted, mentally ill, or all of the above. 3, Jesus Christ, how differently things may have turned out if my client had had access to mental health services on the outside. Or 4, wow, this person who was completely dysfunctional on the outside has adapted really, really well to the structure that an institutional environment provides. Perhaps it's due to my own religious beliefs and my analytical nature, but the idea that some people are just bad or monsters has never rung true to me, nor has it been born out of my observed experience. Story 12. My mom is a lawyer, and this is a story about how she quit being a public defender. When you are a public defender, you don't get to choose your cases. She was assigned a young man who, with the help of his girlfriend, had gotten a kitten from a free to a good home ad in the paper. They then brought it home and gave it to their dog as a chew toy. I think they also filmed it. So, yeah. She said she needed a shower after every meeting with him. She canceled her PD contract after the case concluded. Story 13. I'm not a lawyer, but I worked as a paralegal for many years, mainly in family law. To preserve confidentiality, I will be vague and not include genders or locations. Now, I had a client who was going through a divorce. The client and their soon-to-be ex-spouse had a 12-year-old son with autism. They sat the child down at a table and made him choose which parent he wanted to live with. The client called me to gloat that the child had chosen in their favor and to direct that paperwork be prepared. This client was a prominent member of the business community and earned a high salary, treating this child like a commodity. I was disgusted. Although I no longer practice law, this one will always stick with me. Story 14. My significant other's mother, Elle, was abusive. She frequently hit her husband, was a compulsive liar, and just generally made her family miserable. And when they were settling the divorce, the judge initially deemed testimony from the kids, my sister and her brother, unnecessary, probably because they were minors at the time and testifying against one of their parents would be hard on them, to say the least. However, the lawyer representing Elle was really insistent that they testify. Well, it must have been a shock to the lawyer to suddenly have 2 more witnesses with dozens of accounts of driving under the influence, domestic violence, etc. We figured Elle must have lied to her lawyer about some significant details because they were completely caught off guard and more than a little angry after the testimony. We like to believe it helped solidify some of the criminal charges placed against her. It was a nice bit of karma after years and years of gaslighting and false rumors that her own lies got her caught. Story 15. Not the client, but my managing partner. The client was a senile 90-year-old man who wanted to sell land worth a little less than $1 billion to some businessmen. Suffice it to say, many wanted to take advantage of the situation. One such person, to my dismay, was our managing partner. The partner wanted to insert a provision that would have effectively funneled about 60% of the proceeds solely to him. You could see how his eyes gleamed at the mere mention of money. The provision got lost in the revisions. I was doing the revisions, and I'm no longer part of that scummy firm. Story 16. Many years ago, I worked as a solicitor's representative in Crown Court cases. Now, one of our clients was a 70-something-year-old man who had been in jail for 15 years for assaulting a child. The solicitor and barrister were working on getting him released as he had received clean reports from just about everyone. However, while he was out of jail and at the dentist, he ran straight at two children in the waiting room and the guard stopped him. 3 weeks later, I had to sit him down in a room and explain to him that he was not there for a hearing to release him, but rather to be committed to a secure mental health facility for the rest of his life. He didn't take it too well, but I shed no tears. Story 17. When I was younger, I got arrested and ended up in county jail for a bit. When we first got transferred there from the police station, we had to see a judge who would set our bail. The whole thing was done from inside the jail and through a TV screen, so we never saw the judge or a public defender in person. While waiting in line, I was standing next to a guy who had been in and out of jail before, and we overheard the case of an 18-year-old kid who had a very long rap sheet. The current charge involves allegedly smacking a brick over the head of an elderly man and robbing him. Even the guy next to me, who had met a ton of other criminals, was shocked by this, especially since the kid was so young. It was sad to think that this kid's life was already so messed up at such a young age and was likely to get worse. Story 18. Not a defendant, but a divorce case. The client was a woman in her late 30s with 2 kids and a successful medical professional husband. The husband caught her cheating on his birthday in their bed while their kids were downstairs. He wanted to patch things up, but she decided on a divorce. As the lawyer started to gather details, he found out that the husband had been treated twice for gonorrhea, which he had caught from his wife both times. Moreover, the second child was not his, as the child was of a different race. It turned out that the woman had multiple affairs going on at any given time and would even bring them home and lie to her kids about their profession. She would also engage in illegal activity with them within minutes of dropping her kids off at school. The woman boasted about how she manipulated her husband, who knew about a lot of the affairs but still tried to win her back. The case involved a lot of unpleasant details, and the lawyer received money that he did not want to go into the details of. Story 19. Not a lawyer, but the son of one who stopped being a criminal defense lawyer after a particular case. The case involved 2 young Russian guys charged with securities fraud. My dad worked hard on the case and secured them a good deal with probation, a fine, and community service. That night, the guys treated my dad to dinner and a news story on insurance fraud came on the TV in the bar. One of the guys pointed at the TV and said, "Hey guys, security fraud is old news. Let's try that next." My dad came home to my mom and said that he could not do criminal defense anymore because he realized that the people he was defending were genuinely just bad people. Story 20. I'm a civil defense lawyer, so maybe not as juicy as the criminal defense folks. Some of the work I do is employment defense, particularly age harassment and discrimination cases. I'm pretty cynical and see a lot of cases where plaintiffs are full of shit, particularly in harassment and discrimination cases. In one case, I was defending a company and that company's manager jointly. The manager seemed like a straight-up guy, and I pride myself on being a good judge of character. I was pretty convinced the case was just payback from a disgruntled employee. To my credit, the plaintiff, a 38-year-old female, was an inferior employee by all accounts. Still, it didn't prepare me for what I found when I did a review of every email the company had stored on their servers. Not only did this guy stick his hand down this woman's shirt without consent, but when she threatened to go to HR, he said he'd get her fired and make sure she never got a job again. Now, the lady was a single mother with 3 kids. He also propositioned her for hooking up in exchange for a day off. He thought the email had been wiped because the company had a 1-year retention policy. Apparently, some of the company's older emails remained on a server before the policy was put in place because of the migration of the emails from an older outsourced IT company. I had to withdraw from the case thereafter for conflict reasons since my 2 clients' interests were no longer aligned.